Let's get some analysis then on where things stand at the moment. Jamie Jenkins is with us, former head of health analysis at the Office for National Statistics. Hi, Jamie. How are you doing?
I'm good, Gareth. You all good?
I'm good, thank you. Vaccines, first of all, from a statistical point of view, because that's what you deal in. How strong is the evidence that they work?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite strong, Gareth, because if we're tracking, say, the last wave, and tomorrow is the 1st of September, and it was wave 2 kind of started a year ago tomorrow, where wave 2 kind of kicked in, and we had that awful winter where we saw kind of hospitals overrun and cases shooting dramatically up and lots of deaths. So if you're looking at the number of deaths in relation to the number of cases that we got at the moment, they're around 90% lower, and the number of people going into hospital about 80% lower. So when you're tracking the actual cases and people who are catching infections, and then looking at the bad outcomes of hospitalizations and deaths, the vaccines significantly are reducing the impact.
Look, case rates are high. We're not, as you've said, seeing the same effect we've seen before on hospitalisations and death rates. Is there a tipping point, though, whereby hospital admissions get to a point where the NHS can't cope with much else other than COVID?
Of course, there will be that, Gareth, because if we do look at the numbers, at the moment there's around 205 patients in hospital, which makes up just under 2.5% of all patients. Now, it was well over that when we look at the heart of the pandemic. So if you look at the case rate at the moment, the First Minister said last week that he's making no changes to the restrictions in Wales. But the case rate that we had last time, it was the 10th of January when we last saw this, when we were in a national lockdown. And then that was when we were coming down, because we had a lockdown that kicked in around the 20th of December. And when he was going up, it was around the 7th of December when we saw that kind of thing. And it was just before the national lockdown. So the First Minister's made the decision to make no change. And the reason for that is obviously the vaccine rollout. I think what will happen is that we've got, say, 2.5% of patients now who are in hospital. And remember, there's 205 patients in total. That won't be totally everybody who's in hospital because of COVID. Some people will be testing positive for COVID because it's quite prevalent in the community. But even those patients can put a strain on services because they'd have to separate them and put them separate so that people don't catch it. So there will become a tipping point. I think what would be useful to know from ministers is there a tipping point where they may decide to put restrictions back in?
Yeah, and we've heard those sort of noises, albeit not fully extrapolated in Scotland, haven't we, over the past few days? I'm just curious, Jamie, is this, we've heard this phrase, haven't we, living with COVID. Is this what it looks like then? High-ish cases, but relatively few hospital admissions and deaths. Is this the foreseeable future?
Well, hopefully things don't get too much worse, because one of the things we haven't had the test with the vaccine yet, Gareth, is through the winter months. Now, we've had this kind of spike in cases over the last kind of period, which has been in kind of the summer months. And we know that respiratory viruses tend to thrive more in the winter months. And that's mainly because people are indoors more and they may be mixing more, etc. So I think if we can see the same effect of the vaccines and the same effect on rates when we go through the winter months, that will be what we mean by kind of living with COVID. Because, sadly, we see huge numbers of people dying each week from pneumonia and flu as well. And that's kind of a virus that we've learned to live with. Ultimately, I've just been looking at the latest figures as well, and we start to see in Wales that the deaths from non-COVID are now above average for the time of year. And that might be because people haven't been seeking out healthcare the past year. So the government's got a difficult balancing act, because you can't have all of the resources focused on COVID when we've got these other issues going on. So living with COVID is going to be trying to have COVID in the community with a vaccine to help protect things without closing everything down, so people can kind of live some form of normality whilst we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Jamie, thanks very much for that. That's Jamie Jenkins.